Dakota Territory, January 1866. At the Army fort, the thermometer reads 40 below zero. Soldiers huddle around iron stoves and log barracks, and still the surgeon's ledger fills with frostbite cases that winter, like every winter, the cold will maim more men than combat. 20 miles away, in a river valley, stands a village of hide cones held up by pine poles. Inside one of them, a grandmother tends a fire smaller than a campfire, children sleep warm under buffalo robes, and a man repairs arrows with bare hands. Same night. Same cold. One of these two peoples understood winter, and it was not the one with the stoves. Respect the enemy first. Winter on the northern plains is one of the harshest inhabited climates on Earth, temperatures to 40 and 50 below, winds off the mountains with nothing to slow them for 1,000 miles, blizzards that erase the world for days, and snow on the ground for half the year. Wind chill at those numbers freezes exposed skin in minutes. Cattle brought by settlers died by the 100,000 in single storms. This is the climate the Lakota, Blackfoot, Cheyenne, and Cree did not merely survive, they raised children, kept horses, made art, and told their longest stories in it. On purpose. Every year. Start with the building Hollywood never took seriously, the teepee. A cone is the strongest simple shape against wind, no flat wall for a gale to grab, so blizzards that flattened army tents float around it. The frame of lodgepole pines carried snow loads without ribs or trusses. And the cover was only half the system, inside hung a second wall, the liner, leaving an air gap, dead air insulation, the same principle as a modern thermos and double-glazed windows. Cold air entering under the cover rose between the walls and fed the fire's draft, carrying smoke cleanly out the top. A home, a chimney, and a ventilation system in one piece of engineering you could pack on a horse in 15 minutes. The genius continued in the details. Families banked snow around the teepee base using winter's own material as insulation, an igloo principle on the open plains. Floors were layered with hides and robes, and ozen, a canopy over the sleeping area, trapped a pocket of warm air where the children slept. The fire itself stayed small. Dry cottonwood and buffalo chips burn hot with little smoke because the structure was doing the work, not the fuel. Travelers' accounts agree with remarkable consistency. Step in from a blizzard, and a well-kept lodge was comfortable enough to sit in a shirt. At 40 below. Around a fire the size of a hat. Where you spent winter mattered as much as what you lived in. Bands chose winter camps the way generals choose fortresses, deep river valleys, out of the wind, with cottonwood groves for fuel, water under the ice, shelter for the horses, whose winter food was the inner bark of those same cottonwoods, peeled and fed by hand when grass lay buried. Camps spread along the bottomlands, sometimes for miles, band after band. The blizzard roared across the prairie flats overhead while life in the valley went on below it, the plains version of going underground for the winter. Now the clothing, because the buffalo robe may be the single most underrated garment in history. Worn fur side-in, a winter robe from a cow killed in November, when the coat is thickest, outperformed anything the army issued for the next half-century. Traders, trappers, and soldiers all abandoned their wool fur robes when they could get them. Under it, layered hide shirts and leggings, fur-lined winter moccasins stuffed with grass for insulation, mittens on cords, fur caps. Hide blocks wind completely, wool does not. The army froze in wet wool. The Lakota walked out into the same storm-dressed, in effect, as buffalo. Winter ran on summer's work, the larder built in the warm months, parfleches of pemmican and dried meat, caches buried in lined pits, dried prairie turnips and berries. But winter also offered its own harvest. Buffalo floundered in deep snow, and hunters on snowshoes could approach carefully and take what the camp needed. Snowshoes turned men into the fastest animals on the winter plains, toboggans and dog travois hauled the meat home. And on the coldest nights, the diet itself was a heating system. Fat and marrow burn like fuel in a working body, and the people ate them deliberately, and in quantity, for exactly that reason. And here is what nobody expects: winter was the cultural high season. The bands called the deep winter moons the storytelling time, the only season when the great sacred story cycles could be told, night after night around the fire, some tales taking many evenings to complete. Winter was when the keepers of the winter counts painted the year's history onto hide calendars, one image per year, chosen by council, a chronicle some bands maintained for over a century. We can still read the meteor storm of 1833 on a dozen of them. School, church, library, and parliament, all of it happened inside those hide walls, while the wind did its worst outside. Honesty requires the other side. Winter could still kill, and some winters did. A blizzard could catch hunters in the open, a bad buffalo year meant the reserve foods, then hunger. Elders in the worst years chose to walk into the snow so children could eat, a sacrifice remembered in stories with reverence and grief. And the darkest winters came when the system was already broken. After the buffalo herds were destroyed, the Blackfoot starvation winter of 1883 killed hundreds, not because the people forgot how to live with cold, but because the food their system rested on had been shot out from under them in a single decade. The U.S. Army, meanwhile, learned winter's military meaning the hard way, then used it. Early winter campaigns were disasters of frostbite and dead horses. Officers concluded plains winters made war impossible. But winter was also the one season the villages stood still, their horses weak, their families gathered, and so the army strategists made a cold calculation: attack then. Custer's dawn attack on the Washita in 1868 and the winter campaigns that followed struck camps at their most domestic and most vulnerable. The season the plains peoples had mastered as a home was turned against them as a weapon. It remains one of the grimmest chess moves in frontier history. Strip it to the principles and the winter system reads like a modern engineering textbook: aerodynamic structures, double wall insulation, thermal mass management, layered breathable clothing, high-fat cold weather nutrition, terrain selection, snow as building material. Arctic expeditions and modern cold weather gear rediscovered nearly every item on that list, one patent at a time. The people of the plains had no thermometers and no textbooks. They had observation, iteration, and 10,000 winters of institutional memory, and they turned the deadliest season of their world into the season of stories. That is not surviving a climate. That is owning it. Today, teepees still rise on the northern plains, at powwows, at ceremonies, and in backyards where grandparents teach the liner trick to kids who live in houses with furnaces. Winter counts hang in museums, and Lakota and Blackfoot historians still read them aloud, year by painted year. The knowledge survived the century that tried to erase it. Next on this channel, why a bow beat a musket for 200 years, the ballistics will genuinely surprise you, and the democracy that was already ancient when the Constitution borrowed from it. Subscribe, and bring a robe. The real history of winter is warmer than the myth.